Superman, the Man of Steel, the Man of Tomorrow, the world's greatest superhero, one of the most famous characters, but for some reason people don't really seem to take to him, especially when it comes to movie adaptations. Big Blue is no stranger to the silver screen. The first big adaptation we got was the Richard Donner Superman film with Christopher Reeves, Marlon Brando, Margot Kidder, Gene Hackman. And this film was it was epic, it was quite campy, it's very of the time, but it has that triumphant John Williams score, it has the great performance from Christopher Reeves, the duality of Clark Kent versus Superman, but it's also quite different from the comics of the time. Superman was an anchorman in the comics. It was quite removed from the context that the movie gives for the character, but the film worked. Great chemistry between the main cast members. The aesthetic of Krypton was very interesting. This is the first time we sort of see the crystal aesthetic for Krypton. There were religious undertones. This is where we get the messianic idea of Superman that we see in modern iterations. It was a pretty good film. Unfortunately, after this, the sequels were terrible. Fast forward to 2006 and we get Superman Returns. And yeah, coming off the back of the X-Men series, Bryan Singer was riding high. Unfortunately, him producing this movie ruined two films, X-Men 3 and this movie. Everything about the film, from the costume to the casting, was just a misstep. Horrible. The most interesting action scene was actually cut out of the movie. So 2013 rolls around and WB wanted Christopher Nolan to direct a Superman movie. He'd been, of course, the person responsible from taking Batman from the very campy 60s iteration and the probably equally campy 80s iterations, 80s, 90s iterations with bat nipples, transforming the image of Batman to this grim, gritty, real-world character. And I think they wanted to do the same with Superman. The initial promotion didn't give away much. I think the first teaser was basically just images of young Clark Kent running around with a red cape and voiceovers of his respective fathers, Jor-El and Jonathan Kent, talking about who he could end up becoming. And then the very last shot is Superman shooting up into the stratosphere. So we get this sense of a kind of cerebral, deep, thoughtful story, well, at least based on this particular promotion. And I guess we can sort of discuss if that was the case. So we start off on Krypton with Superman being born, and he's the first natural birth in generations. Kryptonians have gone to a system of where Kryptonians are birthed in pods. We get a Krypton that's basically an amalgamation of different versions we've got throughout the comic history. So you have some things that are influenced by John Byrne, so Kryptonians being birthed in pods. We have some stuff that's influenced by World of New Krypton from 2009 with the sort of guild structure of society. So whether you're in the military, you're a scientist, or you're a laborer. There's a little bit of an influence from the animated series. I think particularly with Jor-El, there's an influence from there. Personally, as a comic book curious, there are some things they missed out that I didn't like. I don't like the fact that the sun isn't red. That's obviously, that's a big thing. The aesthetic of the planet isn't necessarily my favorite. I think my favorite is probably the Donner version with the crystals. But I will say this is the most alien feeling Krypton, so I can appreciate it for that. The reason for the destruction of the planet is that Kryptonians have harvested the planet's core for energy, which has then led to self-destruction. I'm fine with that. The reason changes all the time. Sometimes it's the sun, sometimes it's Brainiac, sometimes it's earthquakes. So I don't mind that. My issues with the Kryptonian sequence are, one, it's too long, and two, I think it sets up a lot of interesting ideas that it then fails to capitalize on or just contradicts later on. A big thread in this movie is nature versus nurture, which is sort of highlighted by the fact that Superman is a natural birth compared to other Kryptonians who are grown, and therefore he isn't necessarily predisposed to make the same decisions that they make. Zod has this really, really compelling monologue where he talks about how he's been robbed of his soul because essentially him being stopped from bringing Krypton back leaves him in a position where he can no longer fulfill what he was born to do. He was born to protect Krypton. But my thing with this is, as great as that speech is, Zod isn't very good at his job. He's continually getting beaten. Jor-El beats him up in the beginning of the movie. And again, it kind of, for me personally, contradicts this idea of nature versus nurture, because we don't get a context for why Jor-El is so capable as a fighter. He literally beats up at least 6 or 7 military guild Kryptonians. And it's not even just the fact that he beats them up. The manner in which he beats them up. He beats the brakes off of Zod. Pow, 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 pow. He gives him a 3-piece, 4-piece. So you've given us this context where people are literally grown, genetically predisposed for particular purposes, but they can break out of those purposes quite easily, apparently, because again, we have no context for how Jor-El is able to beat up Zod. And the fact, and even it goes further, because Zod literally has this thing of where he talks about how he trained his whole life to hone his senses and this and that, has this little power-up moment, but it doesn't really matter because Superman's always winning this fight. I mean, and you could explain it away by, well, Superman's been there for longer, so he's absorbed more solar radiation, blah, blah, blah. But at the same time, I don't think that argument holds up, because if you go back to the Smallville fight, when he's fighting Faora and Namek, he's getting his ass handed to him because of their military training. So what, and also because they are genetically predisposed to be warriors. So, and you know, Zod even has this thing where he says, "Where did you train? On a farm?" And it's like, you're making fun of Superman not having this military training. But his dad beat you up. He's beating you up right now. So so my point is that, like, with this idea of people being literally born for these purposes, it doesn't seem to hold up throughout the whole film, because the rules are broken from the very start with that Zod versus Jor-El fight. Even when Superman sort of asks his dad, "Why didn't you come with me?" and his dad says, "Well, because we were relics of Krypton too." It's like, well, were you? Because you made a decision to have a natural baby. You learned how to fight. So clearly you weren't as tied to this genetically predisposed stuff as you thought. Also, we really didn't need that whole Zod killing Jor-El stuff. Superman doesn't need a revenge plotline. He's not the Punisher. He's not Batman. He's not Spider-Man. Like, it's just unnecessary. And it takes away the heartfelt moment between Lara and Jor-El at the end of Krypton, which we as a comic book fandom are very accustomed to seeing. I'm all for trying new things and new iterations, but at the same time, if it ain't broke, don't fix it. I think my next big gripe is with the main character, Superman himself, Clark Kent, Kal-El. I think Henry Cavill is a good choice. I think, you know, he looks the part, and I think he's a decent actor. I've seen him in different things. I think he's a decent actor, so I think with the right material, he could be a good Superman. But I think particularly in this movie, we don't really get much from him. Actually, in this movie and in its sequel, we don't get much from Superman at all. He doesn't speak all that much. A lot of his lines are just exposition. He's very pensive. We don't get much of an insight into who Clark Kent is as a character. And I guess part of this movie is sort of Clark discovering who he is. But with that journey, it's very kind of coincidental. He's traveling around the world sort of without a purpose. Well, his purpose is to see if he can find any information about his origin. But there's no real... He only lucks onto the ship. Like, it's only because people are... he doesn't put himself in a position where he's actually finding things out. He's just working at a bar, and this military guy happens to be talking about this thing they found under the ice, and he's like, okay, cool, I guess I'll end up going there. So it's like there's no explanation to why Clark is choosing the different occupations he's having across the world. If Clark is going on this soul-searching journey to discover who he is, make it a soul-searching journey. Show us the reasons he's going to the places he's going to. Show us the people he's meeting. Show us how he's experiencing humanity and how he's taking that on. I think, you know, they tried to sort of take this from the Superman Birthright miniseries, which was really good. But again, when Clark's having his journey there, you know, he has a purpose to why he's going to each of these places. He's in Ghana and he's taken up this role as a reporter. It's an intentional decision. His intention is discovery. In this, it's kind of like, it's just a luck that he finds the ship that tells him who he is. And yeah, I think because Superman is this character that people believe to be unrelatable, you can't not delve into who he is. In the opening movie of a series, you can't not delve into who Clark is. We don't see much. We don't get much. And it gets worse as the films progress. Like, Superman speaks less and less progressively in each new film. So for me, it's like, you need to delve into Clark Kent as a character. Clark Kent as a human being, that's how you make Superman relatable. He is a man. He's someone that grew up in rural Kansas on a farm. He is a man at the end of the day. You know, there are snippets they try to put in, like there's him watching the baseball game, drinking a beer. Like, there are moments they try to kind of flicker it in, but again, it's not enough. There's really too much of a focus on him as a messianic figure and on his powers. You can't afford to do that, leaving Clark Kent as a blank slate especially when by the end of the movie you're going to force him to do something that's pretty much against the essence of the character. The audience is kind of left wondering why Clark wants to help people, why he wants to do what he does and eventually become Superman. Because even with his parents, we get the Kents obviously wanting to hide what Clark can do for his own safety and for the safety of others, which completely makes sense. But then you have Jonathan Kent essentially teaching him this lesson that it's better to hide than help people. And he teaches him that lesson even in his death. So it's like, where does his inclination to help come from? Because even in the next movie, in Batman vs Superman, Martha tells him, you know what, you don't have to do any of this, you could just drop it all. So it's like, okay, cool, we see Clark helping people on the oil rig, we see him saving the bus as a child, but where is this inclination coming from? Why is he doing this? It would just be helpful for there to be some sort of dialogue where Clark can tell someone else how he feels about having these powers, why he feels inclined to use them. Just something along those lines so the audience can sort of see inside of his head. We don't get that. And on top of that, it's contradicted by the fact that he's so reckless. Like, I think making him 33 in this movie was a mistake. He should have been a bit younger, because just the things he does, like for example, him attacking Zod when Zod threatens his mother. I get it. He's overwhelmed with emotion, and this is the first time in his life where he's been able to physically hit someone and not worry about that person dying. But he then flies Zod through a power plant in the small town that he's from. A small town that he knows, can't afford to just rebuild a power plant like that. He then crashes into a local petrol station. He then tells people very quietly, it's not safe, get inside, and proceeds to smash people into these said buildings he told them to get inside of. He's too reckless and careless. In none of the fights is he trying to prevent death and destruction. He's just fighting. And I get it, it's his first time as Superman, he's inexperienced, blah blah blah, but it's just too much. It's too much. He's too happy to sort of let people die. Metropolis gets completely obliterated and he doesn't do anything to prevent any of the destruction. In the Kansas fight scene, I'd say he makes things worse by literally just throwing people into things in this small town that he's from. So he probably knows how valuable this infrastructure is to this small town, and he's completely happy to almost destroy the entire town. You can say there's the moment where he grabs Feyora and tries to fly away. The Smallville fight should have began with him saying, these people have done nothing to you, let's take this fight somewhere else. And then they should make a move to force him to have to fight in Smallville. That should be what happens. But instead, he's just happy to put people in danger. Anytime he's in the costume and people are around him, he's very happy, too happy to put them in danger. Now, I don't want people to just walk away thinking I hate this movie. I'm not its biggest fan. I won't pretend. There were parts I liked. I liked the S-Shield. It's a really great design. I like the Hans Zimmer score. It sounded beautiful. The movie has a great cast. Michael Shannon, Henry Cavill, Laurence Fishburne, Diana Lane, Kevin Costner. So many stars that I think were suited to the roles that they were picked for. But in terms of the actual execution, they missed the mark. It wasn't that modern Superman story that everyone wants and needs. I think choosing Zack Snyder to direct was a misstep. In the time since the movie come out, a lot of his ideas for the franchise have sort of come to light, and things like making Martha Kent and Martha Wayne the same person. I don't think he has a great grasp on comic book characters, and I think it shows in his adaptations. People can disagree with me on that, I'm fine, but that's my personal opinion. Anyway, like, comment and subscribe. This is the Neeks and Freaks Show. Hope you enjoyed this first video. Many more coming your way. Stay tuned. Peace.